All right, welcome everybody to week 5 of climate change education. This week, Marianne will be giving a talk on how to write an effective op-ed. She'll be giving a presentation and there will be an opportunity to review an op-ed and answer some questions at the end. With that, go ahead and take it from here, Marianne.
Thanks, Justin. So why am I interested in op-eds and why did I decide that that would be the assignment for this course? So let me just start out by saying that I'm in this fellowship program called the Public Voices Op-Ed Project, and I'm in the Cornell version of it, but they've also done it for community organizations, and I think they've done it for returning inmates, lots of different groups. And the whole purpose of this Public Voices Op-Ed project is to get more voices, more diverse voices, whether it's people of color, people with different backgrounds, women, into the media, and in particular, writing op-eds. So what is an op-ed? Well, before we get into that, we're going to talk, just to remind you that your assignment for this course is to write an op-ed. And you're going to be answering the question of how do you think environmental education should address climate change? And then, as far as I know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, you're going to be asked to post your op-ed to a new Pinterest board that'll be the 5th Pinterest board, so it'll be right along those others, EE, capacity, climate change, but it'll be the op-eds of our class. So we'll be creating a lasting legacy where other people, and you can share these through your social media, can come and see what your opinions are and what your fellow participants in this online course, whose opinions are on environmental ed and what it should be doing about climate change. So getting back to what is an op-ed. So here's a definition. An op-ed is an essay in a newspaper or a magazine that gives the opinion, and I think that's the important thing, of the writer. And then the last part is just it's written by someone who's not employed by the newspaper or the magazine. I thought it stood for opinion editorial, but actually I found out when I was preparing for this that it stands for opposite editorial, and that's because that's where these op-eds were, at least historically, placed in the newspaper, which would be opposite the editorial page. I guess that's all up for grabs now that we're digital. But that's the definition and that's the origin. So through this Public Voices Fellowship program, I get to learn about how to write op-eds, and one of the, probably the most important thing here is what's the basic structure of an op-ed. And we're talking about something fairly short here, about 800 words. So they usually start out with a lead or some kind of news hook. And I'll have them later on in my talk, which is actually going to be pretty short, only about 10-15 minutes today. I'm going to give you some examples of news hooks. But if you think of op-eds, you know, you probably already have some in mind, like some recent news event that really is going to capture people's attention. So that's what you start out with. Then the thesis, so that is what your statement is. In your case, it would be, what do I believe about how environmental education should be addressing climate change? Then you're going to have your argument. And your argument, as you'll see in a minute, needs to be based on evidence. But the evidence can be all different kinds of evidence. So it can be statistics, it can be something from the news, a report from a credible organization. I'm using a report on community gardening and the growth of community gardening from the National Gardening Association website report, for example. It can be quotes from experts. It can be something from the theoretical scholarly literature. A lot of people use historical analogs, like they might talk about something from Greek history, for example. And then it can be also, evidence can be your firsthand experience. So it's not just like scientists, that has to be one kind of evidence. Lots of different evidence. In fact, it's best if you vary different kinds of evidence so that you kind of reach people who actually resonate with different sorts of evidence, whether more quantitative or more arguments or more historical. And usually you'll have, say, 3 different types of evidence to support your argument. We'll see that in a minute. And then what you do in what's called the to be sure element of the op-ed is you sort of acknowledge that all, or at least the main argument you can think of that would argue against what you're saying. So essentially, what you're trying to do is preempt your critics by acknowledging that there's flaws in your argument, and then just kind of present the counter-argument, so essentially discredit the flaws in your argument that somebody else might have. And then finally, the conclusion, it's often circling back to your lead or your news hook. Sometimes it's a call for action too, so you might consider that. And then I put the website of the op-ed project, because that's where I'm getting this information from. So, what are a couple leads or news hooks that we might think about? And these are ones that are actually from real op-ed. So you can use the news. This Wednesday evening, Frances Newton, 40, will be put to death for the murders of her husband and 2 children 18 years ago. So something in the news that really captures people's attention. You can tell a dramatic anecdote. 10 years ago, I asked Bosnian civilians under siege in Sarajevo where they would go if they could escape. You can reference popular culture. The marketing campaign shows real women rather than anorectic teenagers in white bras and panties posing next to the slogan, new Dove firming, as tested on real curves. And then this is a good one, turn conventional wisdom on its end. Sex and the City's main characters are witty, glamorous, independent, and sexually liberated. In short, who wouldn't want to be them? Me, for one. Okay, and there's a few more on the next page. You can use wit and irony to point out a contradiction. So now we know what noble cause Cindy Sheehan's son died for in Iraq, Sharia. It's a good thing, W, I think here, I didn't get this at first, but I think it's George W. Bush, stands for women, or I'd be worried. Use an anniversary. I think you see this a lot in the news. What was the one, Justin, do you remember the one that we're celebrating the anniversary of this week that's been in the news? I'm trying to think, because I know there was something that came up, but in the fall, definitely the sort of the Civil Rights Act, I think that was 1964, so 50th.
Oh, today is, they're commemorating Vietnam.
Vietnam, that's right. That's been in the news a lot this week, because is it the end of the war? Is that what it is? Yeah, thank you.
4 years ago.
That's what I was thinking about. Okay, so cite a new major study. According to a new nationwide poll, 60% of women have cheated on their husbands at least once. And then get personal. College admissions officers around the country will be reading my applications this month, essays in which I describe personal aspirations, academic goals, even in one case, a budding passion for the sitar. What they won't know is that I actually graduated from college more than a year ago, and that the names attached to these essays are those of my duplicitous clients. Okay, so those are all examples of leads and news hooks, ways to draw people into the story. So think of these as generic ways that we might draw people into something about environmental education. And then this is just the last slide that goes through what an op-ed is, and then we're going to have a little bit of chance to discuss this information. So here's the tips for op-ed writing. Own your expertise. This is a big one that we've discussed in the fellowship program a lot, because a lot of people, and in particular women, which is what our fellowship program at Cornell focuses, are maybe afraid to step out of a narrow thing that we're experts in. But the idea is, don't go past where you're comfortable, but you might want to push yourself a little bit, because you're actually probably an expert in something more than you're willing to admit publicly. Stay current, follow the news, because there's almost always something in the news that we can relate to our areas of specialty. Be flexible, have a flexible mind. One of the exercises that we did was in our op-ed project was we just took any random news event, and then, it might be something to do with politics, and we had biologists actually in our fellowship program, and they had to go from some random news hook that they were assigned and relate it to their expertise and the argument that they wanted to make. So the idea is that these news hooks can be really surprising. You can probably use almost anything. Use plain language. That's more of a problem for academics. Might not be a problem for some people who I think many of the people in the course who are actually working with environmental education programs. And then respect your reader, never underestimate your reader's intelligence or overestimate her level of information. So you need to capture their attention, but also make your argument compelling. Okay, so what I thought we'd do now is read an op-ed that's written by Cindy Leifer, who is a Cornell faculty member. She's a microbiologist. She works on vaccines. And she's in the program with me. So here I have a link to an op-ed that she wrote. And what we're going to do is ask you to just read this op-ed. After everybody's had a chance to read this, Justin and I are going to have a discussion of what's the lead in the news hook, what's the thesis, et cetera. So we're going to go through these elements, but apply it to this particular op-ed, which I actually think is a fantastic op-ed. I really liked it. So I think we're going to sign off for a minute. So here's the op-ed that I'm talking about. It's in the Pacific Standard. It's called The Role of Doubt in Science by Cindy Leifer.